Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. We are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show. Hello, all you porcupines. This is episode 54 of the Porcupine Report. Of course, as always, I'm your host, your renegade statesman, your executive director of the New Hampshire Free State Project, Eric Brakey. Glad to be with you this evening. As you know, we release a new episode almost every single Wednesday at 7 o'clock p.m. on all of our Free State Project social media pages, including Facebook, X, Spotify, YouTube, many of your favorite podcasting apps. And we are always posting clips to kind of whet the appetites of those on Instagram and TikTok, those smaller platforms where you can only get in a minute. So I hope that wherever you're consuming this content, you like, subscribe, share with all your friends and family, spread these great free-range conversations that we're having on the Porcupine Report with influencers in the liberty movement, both in the free state of New Hampshire and across the larger liberty diaspora. We got a great episode today. It's going to be a bit of a throwback for some of the older fans of my old show when I was at Young Americans for Liberty, my old show, Free America Now. In terms of bringing a guest on that I haven't had on since those days. But we'll get to that in a moment. First, I want to share some news with you. First, I will say I apologize. I do promise we're going to get you a new episode every single Wednesday, but next Wednesday, that will not be the case because I will be traveling. I will actually be on the Tom Woods cruise, something I've been planning for the last half year to go on the Tom Woods cruise, see a lot of great Liberty folks, including, of course, the great Tom Woods, Scott Horton, and others. Folks, we're always trying to get to come out to our Free State Project events. So I'm going to be sailing the seas all next week, and I won't be able to have a reliable internet connection where I can deliver a fresh new episode for you. But not to worry. I've been doing plenty of conversations and on other shows, and I'm sure we'll serve one of those up like we have in the past for folks in our audience who may not have seen one of these conversations yet. So we'll still have some content to deliver to you next Wednesday, so be sure to tune in. And I do want to take this moment to really promote and remind you that we have two very great and significant events coming up hosted by the Free State Project. Most imminently, we have coming up in late April 24th through the 27th in Concord, New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Liberty Forum. We're doing a nice spin, a slightly different take on things this year with a theme of liberty for real. We are going to be having conversations about how we take liberty ideas out of white papers and bring them into practical reality, just like we've been doing overall with the Free State Project in New Hampshire. So I hope that you'll join us for that. We recently announced that not only are we going to be having a Soho Forum debate between myself and Andrew Heaton, hosted by the great Gene Epstein, over the question of where libertarians should focus their time and energy on trying to change Washington, D.C. Maybe one day you'll reform that bad boy and make him good. I doubt it. Or are we going to focus our time and energy on building liberty for real societies closer to home? We'll be debating that between myself and the always funny and great Andrew Heaton. And of course, we announced recently that Jeff Deist, former chief of staff for Congressman Ron Paul and president of the Mises Institute for almost a decade, he will be joining us as our Saturday night VIP keynote dinner speaker. And we also just announced that Lily Tang Williams, former candidate for Congress here in the state of New Hampshire, who was born and raised under Maoist Chinese rule, who escaped tyranny, came to the States, and chose New Hampshire as the place to advance liberty for real. She'll be one of our keynote speakers as well as some great content blocks that we're putting together on areas where we're seeing real advances in liberty for real, from Defend the Guard to constitutional carry Second Amendment rights, to cannabis freedom, to cryptocurrency and sound money policies. Those will be taking place on our main stage, while we have many more very in-depth, more intimate discussions and dialogues with presenters on practical topics, on many practical topics. So learn all about that at nhlibertyforum.com/tickets, and you can get your tickets there and learn more on the overall website. And of course, there's Pork Fest coming up in June. I've just told you so much about Liberty Forum, so I'll keep it brief on Pork Fest, but I will just say that we did just announce that Connor Boyack, the author of the Tuttle Twins series, and also who's the lead at the Libertas Institute in Utah, he's going to be joining us as one of our keynote speakers at Pork Fest. Not only will he be having a great talk for the adults, but for families and for our children who are coming to Pork Fest. We always have more family programs at Porcupines, and he'll be doing a personal reading of one of his Tuttle Twins books to the kids at Pork Fest. So a fun family-friendly freedom festival. Check it out at porkfest.com. Of course, that's pork with a C, not a K, because it's a Porcupine Freedom Festival, not a barbecue festival. Though this year, with our theme of Taste the Revolution, we actually might have a little bit more barbecue than usual. So I guess whichever you're looking for, the freedom or the food, we're going to have both of it at Pork Fest this year. All right. Hopping into our conversation for today. So I am so glad to bring onto the show for the first time, though certainly not the first time I've had this individual on a show. She was a regular on my last program, which is several years defunct, Free America Now, when we both worked together at Young Americans for Liberty. She is someone who has been been working in development and fundraising. She's worked for Senator Rand Paul. She worked for Young Americans for Liberty. She's now the director of impact with the Emergent Order Foundation. If you followed her on the last show, her name used to be Ivy El-Zatari, but she's since gotten married. Congratulations to Ivy. Though I will say that her new last name, Ivy Karns, is it's a great last name, but it's also El-Zatari was a very memorable one too. So anyway, Ivy, welcome to the show, and congratulations on your new, more normal last name.
Yay! I'm so happy to be here. And it is so funny because I always say that to my husband. I'm like, I just don't have that cool, unique, show-stopping name anymore that makes people want to ask more about me. Now I'm just a Karns. But I love being Karns. It's the best. I wouldn't trade it for El-Zatari or for the world.
Well, congratulations. And I know you've been doing great stuff in the Liberty movement since our time at Yale. I guess before we get into the topic of the show, which I know we're going to do first time for this show, but this is what you would always do on Free America Now. We're doing a true crimes episode, always true crimes of the government. We've got a great topic for you. But before we get into all of that, thank you. You're one of our newest Porcupine patrons for the Free State Project. So thank you for being a patron. I know you're coming to join us at Liberty Forum and Pork Fest this year for the very first time. So we're glad to have you. And tell folks a little bit about yourself, your journey kind of in the Liberty movement, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of our show today.
Yes. Well, it feels so crazy to even kind of reflect back on my journey with the movement. But I was your weird kid. I was the weird 18-year-old who went to Colorado for college and found somebody running for governor who, to be fair, wasn't going to win. There was like a 5-person primary and he was the Liberty candidate. And we all kind of knew he wasn't going to win. But he gave me the opportunity to work on his campaign at 18. And that just kind of catapulted my, not just my belief in our mission, but also made me want to learn how to win for our mission. So that pulled me when I was 21 years old, I ran a congressional race, kind of leading the ground game and the field ops side. Moved up to DC, got a great job with Leadership Institute, running the Youth Leadership School. And then my dream job working for Senator Rand Paul, where I directed Rand PAC as the finance director and also got to wear another hat where I was Rand's executive assistant in the Senate, which everything you've ever thought about working in government is real. It really is like a TV show. I swear it's House of Cards. Even when you work for like the best guys, it's just the whole system's so gross. And then And then as you said, I made my way to Young Americans for Liberty because we are located in the greatest state in the country. Sorry, it's Texas. I also love New Hampshire, but I love Texas.
Them's fighting words, Ivy. You know, Texas isn't even like in the top 5 when it comes to the Freedom in the 50 States Index.
I know, but
Personal freedom is so bad down there.
Austin, Texas has by far been the coolest, best, most unique city I've ever lived in. And I think every city is cool, and every city kind of asks a question of you. And I'm not the one who came up with this. Somebody in Austin who is running for city council that I really wish would have won came up with this. But every city asks a question of you. New York City asks you, how much money do you make? LA asks you, who do you know? Maybe it's the opposite. DC asks you, who do you know and how much money do you make? But Austin asks you, how does your unique ability transform this city into something amazing for all of us? And I love it. I will never leave. And so because I will never leave, I have now found my home at Emergent Order Foundation. And I know you recently had my CEO and mentor on the show, John Popola. So I'm really excited to be working for Emergent Order Foundation.
We were glad to have him. That was a fun show.
Yeah. And I just love what we do. I think it's so important to tell great American stories. And I think the power of storytelling is something that our movement specifically has been really cringe at. And so to be working for an organization that has been able to hone the professionalism of making things viral, making things beautiful to watch, but then keeping true to our classical American values and virtues has just been really fun for me. So that's my story and how I'm here.
Well, let me ask you very quickly before we get into our true crimes of the government episode. I remember 4 years ago I had you on President's Day on the show, and we talked about your favorite and least favorite president. And I don't know if you remember that, but it was President's Day this week, so I thought I would ask you again in the spirit of President's Day. Well, first of all, who is your least favorite president, Ivy? Who's the worst of the worst? We've got a lot to pick from.
It's a lot to pick from. And every time I answer this question, and especially reflecting back on me 4 years ago when I was way more rambunctious probably and had way less of a filter than I hopefully do now, I think I would still choose the same person I chose 4 years ago as my least favorite. And I don't want to upset anybody, but I think my least favorite president is George Bush. And that has everything to do with the Patriot Act and the fact that I think they ushered in a horrible, authoritative regime under the guise that it would be for our safety. And personally, I just hate the TSA the most. I think if there was any department of the government that really annoyed me the most, it would be the TSA. So I would like to continue to say George Bush would be my least favorite. Although I would also caveat, I would love to get a beer with him. And I feel like he'd be like a really great guy to hang out with. I just don't think he was the best president.
I think that's fair. I mean, I think you could take a generous interpretation of George W. Bush that he was like he was in over his head and surrounded by all the bad people who gave him all the bad advice, the Cheneys and everyone. But right. But however we got there, he did usher in like the great leap forward for the national security state, which we've lived under ever since, and have not seen truly threatened until this moment we're living in right now. So maybe we are living in the times where we'll see the repeal and tear down of George W. Bush's legacy. But anyway, good answer, I think.
Good.
All right. So again, to reiterate, so in past episodes or on the last show, you would come on and you would do true crimes of the government. We did true crimes episodes on breaking down the government's crimes against people like Edward Snowden and Julian Assange and Ross Ulbricht. There have been plenty more government crimes that have been committed in the last 4 years. And so when we discussed you coming on to do another true crime segment, there was one crime in particular you thought was so dastardly, so evil that we had to go into it. So Ivy, take us away. What is the true crime of the government that we're going to be exploring today?
So before I bury the lead and give it away, I want to set the stage on, I want everybody to just put yourself in the position that you're hearing all of this for the first time. And by the time I get to the punchline, I promise you probably have already heard this true crime story. But I think what's important, especially now working for a studio that does believe in the importance of storytelling and the way that we advocate for our values, I think it's important that we treat this like a real true crime podcast. And we let people decide for themselves who they think the good guys and the bad guys really are. Is that okay?
That's okay.
Okay.
I'm in agreement.
All right. And feel free to interrupt me whenever you want, but you might just find yourself wrapped up in the story of it all.
All right. I'm here for it.
It's a crisp fall afternoon. It's 2017. And the streets of New York City, they're buzzing, of course. Well, it's New York, so they're always buzzing. Cars are honking. People are rushing past. Everything's moving at that high speed, no time for nonsense, New York pace. And then, bam. A sudden blur of movement, a small figure dashes across the road, and just like that, it happens. A car is speeding by, and the moment is over in a sickening instant. Mark Longo is behind the wheel of his own car, minding his own business when he sees it. A squirrel, a mama squirrel, has just been hit. And right there, just a few feet away from her still body, is something even more heartbreaking. A baby squirrel. Tiny, shaking, completely alone. And I think most people, myself included, would probably just keep driving. Maybe they'd feel a little bad. Maybe I'd say, oh my God, no. But you're probably going to just go along your day and not worry too much about the squirrel. To be fair, I think a lot of people just assume the baby squirrel is probably roadkill as well, coming up pretty soon. But not Mark. Something in Mark knows if he doesn't do something, this little creature is as good as gone. And so for some reason, he pulls over. He ignores the New York drivers behind him who are probably losing their minds over this slight inconvenience. And he steps into the street, kneels down, and there it is. Just this tiny, helpless, cute little squirrel staring up at him with, my assumption is, impossibly big eyes, begging him to save him. So Mark does. He reaches out. He's careful. He's slow. He doesn't want to scare it away. But the little guy doesn't run. Instead, it does something unexpected. It clings on to his little human hands. His tiny claws, barely even formed, grab onto the sleeves of Mark's jacket. And in that moment, it's like this squirrel has already decided, this is safety. This is home. So Mark scoops up the fragile little body, cradles it in his hands. It's so warm, so alive, unlike his mother. And he knows without a doubt, this isn't just some fleeting rescue moment. This isn't just any squirrel. This is Peanut. But of course, what Mark does not know yet is that this one act of kindness, this simple, good-hearted decision to save a tiny little life, is about to change everything. Peanut won't just be his little sidekick. He's about to become an internet icon, a viral sensation, and shockingly, a victim of one of the most insane government overreach cases that you've probably never heard of. But I'm going to assume your audience probably has, Eric.
Hold on.
But right now,
dun. I feel like there needs to be some sound effects there. All right.
I know. But right now, Peanut's just a scared little baby clinging on to the man who just saved his life. And Mark, he's about to take him home, completely unaware that their journey together is only just beginning. And so this is the true crime podcast of Peanut the Squirrel. Are you ready?
Yeah, I think, boy, I wish we kind of had like a true crime soundtrack we could just like run in that moment. You've set the stage perfectly. So I'm hooked, Ivy. So I assume, this is a true crimes podcast, so I assume it doesn't end happily ever after.
Unfortunately not, but there's always, I think, hope at the end of any authoritative rainbow.
All right.
Because of people like us that exist.
So where do we go next? What's the next leg of this journey?
So we'd have to assume, and I will also preface, I can make public all of the different citations and articles that I've read. I even found stuff from the UK press. I found stuff from Greenwich, Connecticut press. Vox wrote articles about this. So, I, using ChatGPT, pulled together as many resources as humanly possible and tried to make sure that everything I said was citable. But I am going to say that I'm still human and AI is still not our overlord. So I can't say without a shadow of a doubt that every single tiny detail has been fact-checked by anyone other than myself and a robot. So that needs to go out there. I also would love the opportunity to talk to Mark and kind of hear his perspective of the covering of his story. Eric, what you and I had covered Ross's case, and I remember having the opportunity to speak with Lynn after the fact, which was probably one of the most surreal moments of my life. And I would like the opportunity to speak with Mark because I would like to hear if I'm doing what happened to him and his family justice or not. But as you can imagine, he takes, Mark takes home Peanut the squirrel, and I'm sure there's a blur of, baby bottles, warm blankets, probably sleepless nights. I do want to preface this with Mark tried to find a sanctuary for Peanut. Okay. So it's not like he brought him in and like all of a sudden was like, I'm a squirrel dad now. That's not what happened. So under Mark and then Daniela, his wife's care, Peanut starts to grow from this weak, shivering little infant into a lively, affectionate squirrel with this incredible personality. And oh my God, I don't know if you've seen the videos, but Peanut has quite the personality. He becomes part of their family. He's playful, mischievous, and most importantly, very funny. He's hilarious. So Mark starts, shortly after he's rescued in 2017, he starts to snap photos. He's filming little videos of Peanut's antics. He's nibbling on snacks. He's bouncing around the house. Sometimes he has a cute little hat on. That's his signature look. He needs a signature look. Peanut the squirrel has his cute little hat. That's his look. And so at first, Mark's just kind of sharing these moments on Instagram for fun. But then I think something wild happens, and I would be surprised if Mark foresaw this happening. Peanut the squirrel becomes a sensation. I mean, the internet literally loses their mind. So people love him. His follower count skyrockets. So hundreds and then thousands and then hundreds of thousands. So by October 2024, so 7 years later, Peanut is a certified social media sensation. Okay, over 534,000 followers on Instagram alone. He's not just some random squirrel anymore. He is Peanut the squirrel. So in this whole process, his fame isn't just about cute videos and viral moments, right? It sparks something a little bit bigger. And I think it's inspired by this overwhelming community that does start to grow and this love that starts to pour in from Peanut's fans, which is just funny to say. And so Mark and Daniela, being Americans, they start to dream a little bigger. They're like, hey, what if Peanut's story could help more animals? Like, are we thinking big enough? And so, as I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but at the time when they rescue Peanut, they're living in Connecticut, and they're basically an hour, 15 minutes outside of New York City. But then in April 2023, after all this time, attention, and care of Peanut and all the love that they're getting for him, they decide to dream bigger. And so they take a leap of faith. They pack up their entire life in Norwich, Connecticut, and they move to Pine City, New York. So Pine City, you can see it on a map. It's about 4 hours outside of New York City, and it is on the border of Pennsylvania and New York. Okay. And the crazy thing is they're on 350 acres of land. 350 acres of land. That is not nothing, even if they're in New York State, right? And they open Peanut's Freedom Farm and Animal Sanctuary. So what starts with this one rescued little squirrel literally becomes a full-blown haven for animals. They've got horses, goats, alpacas, you name it. They take them in, and at the heart of all of it is Peanut. Their original rescue, their star, right? The person who's literally, I say person, the squirrel who's made it possible for Mark and Daniela to dream this big, to have income to dream this big. But of course, we have to talk about the income because running a sanctuary isn't cheap. Feeding and caring for 300 plus animals, it's going to take serious cash. Okay. And this is something that we have to talk about, not because I like where the conversation goes, but because we need to get ahead of it. So Mark finds a new revenue stream, and it's OnlyFans, which is a little unexpected, I think. And regardless of how anybody feels about OnlyFans, it's a very legal way to make money. Okay.
Was he doing porn on OnlyFans, or were they doing like, okay, so all right. So hey, it's a free country. Supposedly. He launches his OnlyFans account, and it's not as Peanut the squirrel's dad per se, but his moniker is Peanut's dad. So he is using Peanut's name in his OnlyFans account. But let's just say that people pay up when they find this OnlyFans. Incredibly, in 1 month alone, Mark had reportedly earned $800,000. Okay. But this new income stream, which by the way, the government says is legal, even though apparently having a squirrel is not legal, but making money through selling your body online, perfectly fine. So he earns $800,000 in 1 month, allegedly.
funneling the profits right back into the sanctuary. Like he really does. He takes this money and he puts it right back into what they need in order to make this sanctuary fit for these animals they're trying to take care of, because that is still the dream. That is still the guiding light. Of course, it's unconventional. It's a little weird. And I think most people are a little weird, but it works. And so day in and day out, Mark and Daniela, they're devoting themselves to this mission, right? Every morning they're up at sunrise, tending to these animals, recording all of it, posting on their social media, managing these donations. And Eric, you know it, I know it. We're both fundraisers. That's a full-time job in itself. They're doing everything they can to get this Peanut Animal Sanctuary Farm up, running, and perfect. And so Peanut, meanwhile, let's take a step back for a second. This little squirrel just watched his mom 7 years ago get hit by a car. And now he's literally living his best life. Like, they saved Peanut. He's scurrying around this big, beautiful farm. He's perched on Mark's shoulders. They're basically attached at the hip. It's really beautiful to see. And he just continues to be this icon. He's a symbol. He's not a pet. He is literally a symbol of second chances. He is the symbol of resilience. No matter what happens, when you decide to save a life instead of walking away, which is what Mark did, really beautiful things can come from that. So it's mid-2024. Sanctuaries become way more than just a refuge for animals. It's basically become a movement, and it is driven by social media. And I think a lot of our modern movements are driven by social media. I think even the fact that we have Doge right now was driven by Twitter. That's kind of awesome. And Mark's no different. So it's building this community of people that believe in kindness and fighting for those who can't fight for themselves. But behind the scenes, as always, red tape is brewing. So despite all this dedication, Mark and Daniela are running into bureaucratic red tape and hurdle after hurdle after hurdle. So especially in New York City, wildlife laws are incredibly strict. But as I mentioned earlier, they're on like hundreds of acres. It's not as if they're still living in that little apartment in Connecticut. And I think that when this story first came out, those two locations got conflated a lot, right? Because in the beginning of Peanut's stardom, everything that you're watching on Mark's social media looks like a tiny little spot. It doesn't look like a huge, and I think it was actually a home, so I don't want to call it an apartment, but it's a tiny house right outside of New York. Of course, they're little, you know? But this sanctuary is on hundreds of acres, but still, there is so much red tape. These wildlife laws are out of control. And so what Mark and Daniela start to do is they start getting this official certification that's taking a while to keep certain animals, including Peanut, that are on this farm that they couldn't get regular exemptions for, educational ambassador certifications. So this is some type of, I don't want to say loophole, but this is some type of way that although Peanut, and I think there were two other animals that fell into this category, were not necessarily exempted by these other licenses that they already had, they could fight and file for them to be considered educational ambassadors. Okay. But paperwork takes time. And unfortunately, government agencies, they're not known for patience and they really don't care. So one day in October 2024, everything falls apart. So it's your worst nightmare. The state is coming with guns, with warrants, with orders. And Peanut, this little squirrel who survived against all odds, he's about to become the center of one of the most shocking cases of government overreach, I can honestly say, in our lifetime, that was driven by social media and made as public as it was. And it's interesting. We're going to get into what happens on that day of October 30th, 2024. But it's interesting that it took a squirrel being euthanized for Americans to finally stand up and say, okay, enough is enough. You can't bring your guns into our home and declare that you're the authority of our lives. Crazy, but true.
I mean, it's amazing to think that at the time, people were speculating that Peanut the squirrel affected the election results. So obviously this had big cultural impact. Now, I didn't realize, I think as a casual observer of all of this, you know, I saw like the photos of kind of Peanut, and I guess I think you're right. You talk about people conflating things. I didn't know they had this huge kind of animal preserve on 300 acres. I just saw the photos, I guess, of the Peanut in the Connecticut home, which still seemed not right and improper, even if that was the case. But but it seems so much more absurd. So I guess tell us a little bit about the government overreach and what exactly happened and what did we all see?
Okay. Well, and I will say to your point, if this case truly impacted the results of the election, I see that as a positive because I believe that that shows that people at that moment recognized, and maybe this community that was being created on social media, they all banded together and said, even if we don't vote for the person on the Republican side or the person that we don't usually ally with, we can't show up to vote for the person we voted for 4 years ago or the party we voted for 4 years ago. Because it's interesting when you see the numbers of how many people came out and voted for the Biden administration in 2020, as opposed for how many did not come out in 2024. And so I think that's what's important about social media is that we can create these communities and these movements where not voting is also an important part of your civic duty. If not voting means that you're not giving help to the party that you believe, authorized a military police force against a man who had a freaking squirrel. And the truth is, Peanut, if nobody had rescued Peanut that day, the likelihood that a squirrel without a mom that was a baby that couldn't get food anymore would have lived is very low. So to your point, to say that even if it was my husband and I live in a condo in Austin, it's a 1-bedroom, we have 2 dogs. We could probably still have a freaking squirrel in this house. Okay. Like if 2 human beings can do it, surely so can a squirrel. And the fact that the government gets to dictate that is insane. But so let's go into it because there's also a lot of alleged behavior of Peanut the squirrel that the government is saying happened. So it's October 30th. It's 2024. So Peanut's now been in Mark and Daniela's life for 7 years. And I think that's an important thing to say. In most states, if you live with someone for 7 years, you're now married. So this is a part of their family. So the air in Pine City, New York, it's sharp, it's cool, right? It's October 30th. It's that kind of early morning chill that bites at your skin, but it still carries that quiet hum of autumn. The trees are just past peak color, the green golden leaves drifting to the ground like the world is setting in for winter. And it should be a peaceful day at Peanut's Freedom Farm. Another morning of feeding horses, checking on the goats, letting Peanut scurry around the porch before posting his usual morning updates. But peace is the last thing on the agenda because the state is getting involved. So at 7:45 a.m., the sound of crunching gravel breaks the morning quiet. Not that slow, lazy crunch of the visitor's car pulling up the long drive. Nope, this is different. It's louder, faster, much more aggressive. And flashing lights. A fleet of vehicles barrel onto the property. New York State Department of Environment Conservation, also known as the DEC, their officers, along with local law enforcement, swarm the sanctuary like an invading army, okay? Guns, tactical vests, a warrant in hand. I mean, what do they think? They're going up to Waco? The knock at the door isn't even really a knock. It's like a pound, the kind that sends your heart straight into your throat before you even know why. Mark and Daniela barely have time to process what's happening before officers push inside, eyes scanning, searching. They move like they already know exactly what they came for. We're here for this squirrel. Peanut. So the warrant is vague, boilerplate language about the illegal possession of wildlife, but to Mark and Daniela, this is insanity. Peanut isn't just some wild animal. He's their baby. He's part of their family. He's part of their home. He's literally allowed them to dream big, to create an animal sanctuary. So at first, as I think all of us would, Mark tries to reason with these people. He's like, hey, this is what we're doing. We've been working on getting the proper licensing. Peanut isn't just a pet. We've had him for 7 years. He's famous. Look at his Instagram. Let me show you. He's also incredibly healthy. There's nothing about my pet squirrel that's sick, but the officers do not care. They go straight for Peanut. So Peanut, he starts to sense this chaos. He scrambles to Mark's shoulder. His tiny little claws just gripping like they did the first day Mark rescued him on the side of that highway. He is trembling, his little heart probably hammering out of its little chest. Mark holds on to him, refusing to let go, but then the officer closest to him lunges. A rough-gloved hand snatches Peanut, pulling him away. That little squirrel screeches, twisting in fear, and then a bite. So allegedly, a DEC biologist lets out a yelp and jerks back, clutching their hand. There it is. That's the excuse they needed. That's the death sentence. Peanut is ripped from Mark's arm, stuffed into a state-issued animal carrier like evidence at a crime scene. Mark and Daniela are pleading, please test him, quarantine him, anything but this. But the response is a cold, bureaucratic, final. Peanut has just bitten, allegedly, a government employee. So New York State's procedure and protocol on rabies is incredibly clear. Any unlicensed, I'm going to do this all in air quotes. If anybody's listening, do people listen to your podcast or watch more?
It's both. It's both.
Okay. So I'm doing air quotes on a lot of this. I just think people should know that. But any unlicensed wild animal involved in a potential exposure must be immediately euthanized for testing. There's no waiting period, there's no appeals, and there's no exceptions. If it is an unlicensed wild animal, euthanized, bye-bye. Just like that, the fate of the squirrel who survived against all odds, because like I mentioned earlier, never in my life, and I love animals, I love my dogs, I love pets, would I have ever pulled over and put a squirrel into my life. His survival against all odds and his fate was just sealed. So the officers turn, they don't say where they're taking Peanut, they don't say how long they have, they just leave. They just leave Mark and Daniela. And they're left standing in the wreckage of their own home, watching the love of their life disappear in the back of a government van. So within hours of them taking Peanut, it's over. Peanut is killed. And this is hard to even say out loud, but the standard method of rabies testing, which requires brain tissue analysis, is decapitation. So don't know how they actually killed Peanut, but we do know he had to have been decapitated after the fact to do the tissue testing. So what do you think the test says when it comes back for this rabies test?
Negative.
He never had rabies. No rabies, no threat, literally no reason. Peanut was perfectly healthy. But none of that matters now.
Yeah, and it sounds like it was a clear-cut case of self-defense, if you ask me. I mean,
right.
Or the way they were lunging at him.
Right, because apparently you're not even safe in your own home if the government wants to be there. And God forbid you want to defend yourself. You will be the one decapitated next. Sorry to say it, but it's true. Because Peanut, this little squirrel who survived being orphaned, was built a social media empire, inspired the creation of an entire sanctuary, wasn't really killed by rabies protocol. Peanut was killed by the state. And so that's why this case has been so important. Go ahead.
Yeah. Now, what if we were to try to steel man the state's case? I mean, obviously, they would argue, well, Peanut bit someone and therefore, the law is clear. But of course, that only happened because the state was already up in the situation and doing basically like a SWAT raid on this sanctuary there. How does the state of New York justify this? I certainly understand that this was, the paperwork wasn't in place, that wasn't technically legal in the state of New York for him to have the squirrel until that process was completed. But it's hard to imagine the amount of government resources that had to be spent and devoted to this SWAT raid over a squirrel that never bothered anyone. How do they justify that? What's their argument for it?
Well, I will say, based off of everything that I've read, it truly seems like this raid by the DEC is still seen as an embarrassment by New York State. It is something that they don't want to be talked about anymore because, to your point, the law was broken. Stupid law. Really probably shouldn't be a law in the books, but the law was broken by Mark and Daniela. My assumption is that, and this is speculation and me putting on my Alex Jones conspiracy hat, I truly believe that Peanut's fame and Mark's money, because we have to always follow the money, and Mark was making bank. He was making bank between social media following and OnlyFans under this moniker of Peanut's dad. I believe they had to make a symbol out of Mark. They had to, right?
They don't want other people thinking they can rescue squirrels and take them in. So you got to make an example out of this high profile.
Well, it's how can we try and make common sense out of government tyranny. We can't. That's a very difficult argument to make. And to be fair, I don't want to steel man this one.
Yeah.
That's not my job.
Well, so certainly I just imagine these people have to sleep they have to sleep at night, right? They have to have some narrative rationale that they use to justify for themselves that somehow they were doing the right thing. I can't imagine anyone is like just the evil squirrel decapitating, villain that
Sure.
in their own minds.
And I think also because it was a squirrel, right? We're not dealing with a kid. Probably makes it a little bit easier. Like when I think, like my husband and I, like I said, we just got married. We don't have our own family yet. I'm praying that one day we do. But so we have 2 dogs. I have a Doberman and a Bloodhound. They're the loves of my life, Bodie and Lady. They're best friends. Jared and I mean, we spend all of our free time with them, making their lives cool, right? Like we take them to park all the time. We give them baths. We give them snuggles. I mean, the majority of my nights are spent on my couch with my husband, our 2 giant dogs, watching and snuggling and, just being our cute little family. They feel like my family. I recognize that I am not their mom. Like they are my little pets. And I'm assuming with Mark and Daniela, they probably felt the same way about Peanut, the way that I feel about Bodie and Lady. If anybody ever tried to come in and take out my dogs, I mean, I love my life, so I would never want to get in the way of like my life going away, right? Or my husband's, but I would not go down without a fight. And the harshness in which within hours, at 7:30 in the morning, you have your whole life torn apart. And then by the afternoon, the 7-year-long animal that you had in your house is now gone. I can't imagine how Mark and Daniela were dealing with that. And I think because it became such this like viral internet sensation, we don't recognize how hard that must have been. Like if you've ever lost a pet before, I know like when my childhood dog Wilson died, opening the door and not hearing his little feet like patter on the wood was the hardest thing to get used to. And we have to remember that Mark and Daniela had 7 years with this squirrel. Yes, it was a squirrel, but it was their baby. And to your point, I don't know how that person who's claiming that a squirrel bit it sleeps at night, knowing what they took away from a very deserving couple who was just trying to make the world a little bit better.
Yeah. And they took Peanut not just away from them, but from the world. He was having a whole an impact, bringing a lot of joy to a lot of people's lives. What has been the aftermath of all of this? I know we've talked a little bit about the political fallout in terms of affecting the spirit of the election. I mean, you said October 20th, 2024 is literally just
30th,
just several weeks before the November 5th elections that saw Donald Trump win back the White House and overall was not a good around the country for Democrats, including in New Hampshire where Liberty Republicans gained seats. So we've talked a little bit about the political impact, but what other ways can we kind of measure the aftermath of all this? Have you read up on how Mark and his wife are what they're doing about all of this at this point? I know we're 4 months after the fact.
Yeah. So I think it's important that we do talk a bit about the political impacts because it did impact the social fabric, I think, of how people, specifically in New York, see their state resources being spent, right? So unfortunately, and I'm not really sure why, it is now like Peanut's case is considered like a right wing. They even use the term like in every article, even like the UK calls it like a right wing rallying cry. And it's interesting to me because there was a time when not wanting the government with guns to enter your home was shared by the progressive left. In fact, I think a militarized police state is something the right wing used to be kind of okay with. I mean, if we're just going to look pre-2016. But now, I mean, the landscape's a little bit different. So Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, he referenced Peanut's case during a speech, and he literally highlights it as an instance of government overreach. So it's like all of these public and political responses start to come out. So Senator J.D. Vance, during a rally, mentioned that former President Donald Trump was fired up about the peanut incident, right? This is prior to the election, using it to criticize perceived government overreach. And then Elon Musk, our new Doge captain, which love Doge, which we should do a whole episode about those crimes that are being uncovered by Doge's overspending committee.
I'd love if you're ready to research and prepare a whole nother one on that, we can absolutely do it. But go on.
Elon expressed his disapproval on social media. He stated that the government should not be allowed to barge into your house and kill your pet. That's messed up. It's just messed up. And so there was legal and social implications in New York State. So New York State, still to this day, it is illegal to keep wild animals as pets without proper licensing. Period, point blank. And if one of those animals bites somebody under the rabies protocol, they will be decapitated to test for tissue, which is crazy. So even though there's other ways to test for rabies, you don't have to kill. You don't have to kill to test. But while, Mark and Daniela claimed they were in the process of obtaining these certifications for Peanut as the educational ambassador, no official license was actually secured. So this legal backdrop starts to raise questions about the balance between wildlife conservation laws and individual freedoms. Now, if we were to parallel this with Tiger King, it seems crazy. Like, it seems absolutely insane that a squirrel was put to death, but Carol Baskins can have tigers running around her property in, I think it's Oklahoma. Like, how is this even in question? Especially when Peanut posed minimal risk.
Yeah, well, because it was the Empire State, right? The least free state in America. Yeah. Well, but it is interesting. I mean, it seems that there are a number of kind of these laws around the country. I mean, I know I dealt with this in Maine to some degree with when we legalized people having the ability to own hedgehogs. And I know that in response to this in New Hampshire, there's been legislation filed, I think it was by Representative Tom Mannion, or at least I know he came on the show recently in the last few months and was talking about legislation to legalize squirrel ownership and kangaroos and all sorts of things. And it always, the only argument I could ever really understand for why you would restrict something like this is if you're talking about an animal that could become an invasive species and screw up the ecosystem of the area. But obviously, a squirrel that's native to the area isn't going to do that, or things that don't naturally fit in the habitat where you are. So it's
right. Well, and I can't guarantee this. I tried to Google it and I literally couldn't find any reference of it, but it's also an animal that wasn't going to procreate either, right? So it's like there's no risk of like, oh, are we going to have like a weird squirrel population pop up in this part of New York where there's not, which there's squirrels everywhere. But anyways, long story short is there really wasn't a threat to neighbors. There wasn't a threat to Mark and Daniela. There was definitely not a threat to that DEC.
I remember hearing at one point in the story, and I don't remember if this was ruled to be not true, but that someone had snitched on the family to the cops, and that led to this. Do you know what the truth is there?
Yes. So all I could find was that the DEC was acting on an anonymous complaint. The problem with that is you can't actually see the complaint. So I couldn't access what the notes were taken down from this anonymous complaint. I couldn't find the date associated with the anonymous complaint. So I don't actually know how long after somebody called in, again, using air quotes, to bring Mark and Daniela to light. I don't know. It could have been, there's speculation, there's sleuthing on the internet. So I heard one theory that it was somebody that was jealous because Mark and Daniela were making a lot more money than they had been making 7 years prior. A lot of it had to do with Peanut. A lot of it had to do with the OnlyFans. And I think some people just don't appreciate that way to make money. And I mean, to be fair, I am not a fan of OnlyFans. I don't think that that is an appropriate way for anybody to be creating an income for themselves, but it's also not my life, not my responsibility. And it's 100% legal under the law. So regardless, shouldn't really come into play in this conversation, but that is what a lot of internet sleuths believe was the main cause of Peanut getting called out. And so Mark and Daniela have been they've initiated a lawsuit against New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, so that DEC group, and they did allege unlawful seizing and euthanasia of their animals. And it wasn't just Peanut that was put to death. It was also a raccoon. And we forget about him because he wasn't really the star of the show. But they're still in that legal battle, and they are seeking unspecified damages for the loss of their companion animals. I think the emotional distress of everything. And like I said, it is a squirrel, but it's a squirrel they've had for 7 years, that they would dress up, that they would feed. It's no different than if you have a relationship with your dogs. I really don't. I mean, they're all pets. None of them are human beings, you know?
Yeah, I hope they win their lawsuit. It's just a shame that the people who that it's the taxpayers who will pay for it, and not the people who actually should bear culpability for making these decisions. What are some, I guess, what's like the big takeaway question people should walk away from this story asking themselves?
When did it become a partisan issue to not want a government agent to be able to come into your home armed over a quote unquote anonymous complaint? When did that become a partisan issue? Why have we allowed the state, the legacy media, and all of these long-held institutions, why have we allowed them to control the way that we see each other as neighbors? Because I don't think that there's a single person who, when you sit down with them and you logically tell them the case of the facts of this case, can genuinely make the argument in the state's defense. And the truth is, the bureaucrats are the problem. They are our enemy. We never were. We're each other's friends, neighbors, community men. We shouldn't be militarizing a police force to take a squirrel out of somebody's home. We should probably just call our neighbors and make sure that they recognize that something's upsetting us or whatever. I just think it's insane that this became a quote unquote rallying cry for the right. Like, what? When did we decide that?
Yeah.
So I think that's what people should take away.
It is interesting to see. I guess it is an interesting statement on kind of how the media has framed our politics today. I was just talking with my wife this morning about how, it used to be that it was those on the left who were much more concerned in the 2000s and the Bush years about what government shouldn't be doing.
Right.
And now so much is very, very about what they want the government to do to us. Ivy, let me give you the final word here. Thank you so much for this well-researched true crimes of the government. A lot that I learned about this story that had tremendous political impact, and maybe might lead to even state legislation here in New Hampshire to legalize squirrel ownership. Final thoughts, final things to share. Tell people about Emergent Order and where people can find you.
Yes. So I would be so grateful if you would head to eo.foundation. We like to say we're what it would look like if PBS and Warner Brothers had a baby that actually loved America. And that's what we're in the business of doing. We're bringing our classical virtues and values to life, whether it's on a YouTube branded channel or a documentary series or a really cool premium original. So I'd be grateful if you'd get there. You can also follow me on social media at IvyNina95 on Instagram. And if you liked this true crimes of the government thing, I would just be grateful to hear about it, because I would like to do this. I think we need more women involved in our movement. And I think that when we frame issues in this way, we can get them really riled up and angry at the authoritative state that exists. But thank you, Eric. It's always a pleasure to come on your show. It's always the best. We always have the best time. And yeah, I can't wait to do it again.
All right. Pleasure's all mine. Looking forward to seeing you at PorcFest and Liberty Forum. And I will say it was nice to see you at the Students for Liberty LibertyCon in Washington, D.C. 2 weekends ago. I thought that the Emergent Order movie on the immigration debate seemed to be very well received there, just as it was when I got to see it premiere in Austin, Texas, thanks to your invitation when I was down there. So it seems like you all are doing some great work at Emergent Order, and I hope we'll see Emergent Order at one of our upcoming events. Would love to do a screening sometime.
Would love that. Would love that so much. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Ivy.
Got it.
All right, everyone. That's the show. True Crimes of the Government. Peanut the Squirrel. I hope you learned as much as I did and you find the case fascinating. Again, a reminder, Tickets are on sale right now for the New Hampshire Liberty Forum. We've got Jeff Deist. We've got Lily Tang Williams. We've got more speakers that we are in the process of announcing around topics ranging from Defend the Guard to crypto freedom, cannabis freedom. We've got some great Liberty for Real dialogues going in depth with presentations and brainstorming sessions to really explore solutions to challenges on the road to a free society. So much happening at the New Hampshire Liberty Forum. Get your tickets, nhlibertyforum.com/tickets, April 24th to the 27th. I really look forward to seeing you there. Tickets are moving, so grab your tickets today. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.